Darnell pulled into his driveway for the third time that week and sighed. Again, the silver SUV was parked right across the mouth of his driveway, close enough that if he tried to back out, he'd either scrape his bumper or get stuck. He recognized the car. It belonged to the woman 3 units down, the one who always seemed to be watching from her porch whenever he came or went. He'd only moved into the townhouse 6 weeks ago. After years of renting cramped apartments and saving every spare dollar, this place felt like a real beginning. 2 bedrooms, a little patio out back, trees lining the street. It was quiet, clean, and safe. Exactly what he'd hoped for. But peace had been hard to come by. The first time the SUV blocked him in, he figured it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't realize how tight the angle was. He left a friendly note on her windshield. "Hey neighbor, could you avoid parking here? It's blocking my driveway, thanks." He signed it with just his unit number, no name, no drama. She didn't move the car the next day, or the day after. By the 4th morning, he was late for work. He tried squeezing out, but his rear tire hit the curb and he had to reverse, sweat already forming on his neck. That's when he noticed her watching from behind her living room blinds. Not helping, just watching. He asked around. One of the guys who delivered packages told him, "Oh, that's Linda, she's on the HOA board. Thinks she runs the place." Another neighbor, an older man who walked his dog every evening, just shrugged and said, "Best not to cross her." At the monthly HOA meeting, Darnell brought it up. He kept his voice calm, factual. "I've had my driveway blocked multiple times by a vehicle parked directly in front. It's making it hard to leave my own home." Linda sat 2 rows ahead. She turned around slowly, arms crossed. "There's plenty of room," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's exaggerating. I've lived here 18 years. I know where I can and can't park." A few people glanced at Darnell, then looked away. No one backed him up. The board chair mumbled something about being considerate and moved on to landscaping updates. That night, Darnell sat at his kitchen table and looked up the city's parking code. Sure enough, Section 1042 clearly stated that no vehicle could obstruct a private driveway, even partially. It didn't matter if it was just a little or not technically blocking. If a resident couldn't freely enter or exit, it was a violation. He called a local towing company the next morning. The owner, Miguel, sounded tired but fair. "You got proof? Photos, video, timestamp?" "I do," Darnell said. "And I've warned her twice." "All right," Miguel said. "We'll come by this afternoon. But once we hook it, there's no turning back. She'll have to pay the full fee." Darnell hesitated for just a second. He didn't want trouble, but he also didn't want to keep begging for basic respect in his own home. "Do it," he said. The tow truck arrived at 2:15 p.m. Darnell stood on his porch, arms loose at his sides, as Miguel's crew hooked up the SUV. A few neighbors peeked through curtains. One woman walked her dog extra slowly down the street, eyes wide. 20 minutes later, Linda's car was gone. She showed up an hour later, striding down the sidewalk in a floral blouse and sandals, face flushed. She stopped right at the edge of his driveway, hands on her hips. "You had my car towed?" she demanded, voice sharp. "Yes," Darnell said evenly. "It was blocking my driveway again. You can't just tow someone's car like that. This is a community, not a war zone. I left notes. I spoke at the meeting. You kept doing it. This is harassment," she snapped. "I've lived here longer than you've been alive." Darnell didn't rise to it. "I just want to come and go from my house without having to play parking Tetris. That's all." She stared at him, jaw tight. For a second, he thought she might say something else, something uglier. But instead, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her unit, muttering under her breath. Darnell went inside and poured himself a glass of water. His hands weren't shaking, but his chest felt heavy. He hadn't wanted a confrontation. He just wanted to live in peace. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. It was his sister, Chloe. "Hey," she said. "Heard you towed the neighborhood dragon." He laughed, but it came out tired. "How'd you hear already?" "Mrs. Langley from 14B called Mom. Said there was drama on the street." "Of course she did. You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "Just tired of proving I belong here." There was a pause. Then Chloe said, "You do belong there. And if she pulls this again, document everything. I'll send you the city code sections." They talked for a few more minutes, and by the time he hung up, he felt a little lighter. The next few days were quiet. Linda's SUV stayed parked in her assigned spot. Darnell started unpacking the last of his boxes. He hung pictures, bought a small ficus for the living room, even planted a few herbs in pots on the patio. Normal life stuff. He almost let himself believe it was over. Then on Saturday morning, he woke to the sound of tires crunching on gravel. He peered through the blinds. There it was again, the silver SUV. Not fully blocking the driveway this time, but parked just close enough that if he opened his driver's door, it would hit the fender. He stepped outside in his slippers. Linda was on her porch sipping coffee, pretending to read a magazine. She didn't look up, but he knew she knew he was there. He took a photo with his phone, then another from a different angle. He didn't say a word, just went back inside. That afternoon, he measured the distance with a tape measure, 28 inches between her rear tire and his driveway edge. Not technically illegal, maybe, but definitely intentional. He thought about leaving another note. But what would be the point? She wasn't making a mistake. She was sending a message, and the message was clear. I'm still here. And I haven't forgotten. Darnell sat on his patio that evening, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. He thought about calling Miguel again. But this time it wasn't so clear-cut. Towing might look petty if the car wasn't technically in violation. He needed a different plan. Something smarter. Something that wouldn't give her more ammunition. For now, he'd wait. Watch. Document. Because if she thought he was going to back down just because she made things uncomfortable, she didn't know him at all. He'd worked too hard, saved too long, and dreamed too big to let someone make him feel unwelcome in his own home. The street was quiet. Birds chirped. A kid rode by on a bike, waving as he passed. Darnell took a deep breath. This was his neighborhood too, and he wasn't going anywhere. Darnell tried to ignore it. He really did. Every morning he'd open his garage, pause for a beat, then squeeze into his car sideways, knees bent. Did her only half open, just to avoid scratching paint on Linda's SUV. It sat parked just outside his driveway like a silent challenge, always in the same spot, always angled just enough to make life harder. He started leaving the house 10 minutes earlier. He backed out slower. He double-checked his mirrors. It was exhausting, but he told himself it was temporary. She'd get bored. She'd move on. She didn't. Instead, things got quieter and weirder. At the mailbox, neighbors who used to say good morning now looked away. The woman who walked the poodle stopped waving. Even the delivery guys seemed to linger less. Then came the whispers. He heard them first at the community laundry room. 2 women huddled near the dryers, voices low. One said, "I heard he threatened her." The other replied, "Yeah, and he towed her car twice already over nothing." They fell silent when he walked in. He didn't say anything. Just loaded his clothes and left, but it stung. Because it wasn't true, and yet it was spreading like smoke through the neighborhood. One afternoon, Chloe came to visit. She'd just finished her spring semester and needed a quiet place to study for exams. She noticed the SUV the second she pulled up. "Still doing that?" she asked, nodding toward it. "Like clockwork," Darnell said. She walked over, pulled out her phone, and snapped a few photos, front angle, side view, close-up of the gap between tire and driveway. "This is textbook passive aggression," she said. "She knows it's not illegal, but she also knows it messes with you." "Exactly," Darnell said. "And if I complain now, I look petty." Chloe sat at his kitchen table, laptop open. "Okay, new strategy. We stop reacting. We start recording." Over the next week, Darnell documented everything. Time-stamped photos. A log of every day the SUV appeared. He even asked Mrs. Ellison, the retired teacher who lived across the street, if she'd noticed the pattern. She didn't hesitate. "Oh, honey," she said, lowering her voice even though they were alone on her porch. "Linda's done this before. Not to me, but to the Chen family when they moved in last year. Parked right in front of their garage for 3 days straight after they put up solar panels she didn't like." "Did they say anything?" "They moved the panels," Mrs. Ellison said quietly. Didn't want trouble. Darnell felt a knot form in his stomach. It wasn't just about him. It was a pattern, and he was just the latest target. At the next HOA meeting, Linda struck first. She stood during the open forum, clipboard in hand, and announced, "I'd like to propose a new rule. No vehicle may be towed from common areas without a 48-hour written notice and HOA board approval." A few heads nodded. Someone muttered, That sounds reasonable. Darnell raised his hand. With all due respect, he said, that goes against city ordinance. Municipal code says if a car's blocking a private driveway, even partially, the property owner can have it removed immediately. No notice required. Linda turned slowly. Well, maybe if people weren't so quick to call tow trucks over small misunderstandings, we wouldn't need rules like this. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Darnell said, keeping his voice level. My car couldn't exit twice. The room got quiet. The board chair cleared his throat. Let's table this for now. We'll review the city code before voting. Linda sat down, but not before giving him a look that said, You think you're winning? That night it rained. Hard. Thunder rolled through the neighborhood just after midnight. Darnell woke to the sound of tires on wet pavement. He peeked through the blinds. Headlights, the silver SUV pulling in, right across his driveway. Not partially, not cleverly, fully, like a wall. She'd waited for the storm. Maybe she thought he wouldn't notice. Or maybe she thought he'd be too tired to do anything about it. He stood there in the dark, rain tapping the roof, watching her taillights fade as she walked inside. He didn't sleep much after that. By 6 a.m., he was up. He took 3 photos from different angles, video panning from his garage door to her rear bumper. Then he called Miguel. Again? Miguel asked. Again, Darnell said. And this time it's clear cut. Send me the footage, Darnell did. 2 minutes later, Miguel replied, We'll be there in 45. The tow truck arrived just as the sun broke through the clouds. Miguel himself got out, clipboard in hand. He measured the distance, checked the angle, compared it to the city diagram on his phone. Yep, he said. This is a full obstruction. You're good. Neighbors started appearing, curtains twitching, front doors opening a crack. Someone walked their dog in slow circles near the sidewalk, pretending not to stare. Linda showed up 20 minutes later, breathless, hair still damp from the shower. She froze when she saw the empty space. What did you do? She demanded, marching up to Darnell's yard. I had your car towed, he said. It was blocking my driveway. In the rain, at night. On purpose. This is abuse. She shouted, voice cracking. You're targeting me. No, he said calmly. I'm protecting my home. You chose to park there. Twice now, after being warned, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I need police. My car was stolen, no, towed illegally. By my neighbor. The officers arrived 20 minutes later. 2 of them. They listened to Linda first. She was red-faced, talking fast, calling it retaliation and harassment. Then they turned to Darnell. He handed them his phone. Photos, video, city code screenshot, even Mrs. Ellison's written statement. One officer nodded slowly. Ma'am, he said to Linda, according to municipal code, if a vehicle prevents access to a private driveway, the property owner has the right to have it removed immediately. No notice needed. But he's doing it to hurt me, she insisted. The officer glanced at Darnell, then back at her. Unless you can prove malicious intent beyond a parking violation, which doesn't appear to be the case, there's no crime here. Linda stood there, arms trembling. The officers left. The crowd of onlookers melted away, but Darnell didn't feel victorious. He felt weary. Later that day, Chloe called. How'd it go? She called the cops, he said. They sided with me. Good, but be careful. When people feel cornered, they get creative. He didn't understand what she meant until 2 days later. He came home from work to find a bright orange notice taped to his front door. It was an official HOA complaint signed by Linda. The accusation? Creating a hostile living environment through repeated aggressive actions, including unauthorized towing and intimidation. The hearing was scheduled for next week. Darnell read it 3 times. Then he called Chloe. This is serious, she said. They can't kick you out, but if the board sides with her, they could fine you, restrict your privileges, even put a note in your file that affects resale value. I didn't do anything wrong, he said. Doesn't matter. Perception is everything in these things. Over the weekend, Darnell prepared. He printed everything, photos, logs, city code, witness contacts. He practiced explaining his side without sounding angry. He even wore his nicest button-down to the hearing rehearsal in his living room, just to feel grounded. But the real blow came on Sunday evening. He stepped outside to take out the trash, and froze. Scrawled in black spray paint across his garage door was a crude symbol. A circle with a line through it like a no sign, but messier, sloppy, mean. His stomach dropped. He called the police again. They took a report dusted for prints, though they said it was unlikely to yield anything, and suggested he install a camera. As they left, one officer paused. "You sure you want to stay in this neighborhood?" Darnell looked at his house, the potted herbs, the welcome mat, the light on in the living room. "Yes," he said, more than ever. That night he sat on his patio, wrapped in a hoodie, staring at the vandalized door. The symbol wasn't just paint. It was a message: you don't belong. But Darnell knew the truth. He'd earned this home. Paid for it in overtime, in skipped vacations, in years of quiet discipline, and he wasn't going to let fear or spite run him out. He pulled out his phone and texted Mrs. Ellison. "If you're willing to speak at the hearing, I could really use your support." Her reply came instantly. "I'll be there, and I'm not the only one." For the first time in weeks, Darnell felt something shift. Not just tension, but possibility. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Darnell spent the days before the hearing in a strange kind of quiet. He didn't sleep much, but he didn't feel tired either. Just wired, like his mind was running on a loop of what-ifs. What if no one spoke up? What if the board believed Linda over him? What if this stain on his garage door became a stain on his life? He cleaned the graffiti the next morning with a pressure washer he borrowed from a guy at work. It took 2 hours and left a faint shadow on the metal, but it was gone. Still, every time he pulled into the driveway, he saw it in his mind. Chloe flew in 2 days before the hearing. She brought legal pads, highlighters, and a calm energy that settled the air in his living room. "We're not just defending you," she said, spreading papers across his coffee table. "We're showing them how this pattern works. How someone can weaponize community rules to push people out." She helped him organize everything. Photos with dates. The city parking code printed in bold statements from neighbors who'd agreed to speak. Mrs. Ellison first. Then a young couple from down the row who'd also dealt with Linda's parking reminders after they hosted a small birthday party for their toddler. "She told us our lawn chairs were disrupting curb appeal," the husband had said, rolling his eyes. "We moved them, but we saw what she did to you. We're done staying quiet." The night before the hearing, Darnell ironed his shirt and laid it over the back of a chair. He checked his notes one last time. He wasn't angry anymore. He was clear. The HOA meeting room was in the community clubhouse, a small space with folding chairs, a water cooler, and a banner that read, "Neighbors Helping Neighbors." It felt ironic now. Linda arrived early, sitting front and center with 2 other board members flanking her like guards. She wore a crisp blouse and a pin that said, "Proud HOA Volunteer." She didn't look at Darnell when he walked in. Chloe sat beside him, laptop open, voice recorder on. The board chair called the room to order. "We're here to review a formal complaint filed by Ms. Whitmore against resident of Unit 24B regarding alleged hostile behavior and misuse of towing services." Linda stood first. Her voice was steady, practiced. "For months I've tried to be a good neighbor. But since he moved in, there's been nothing but conflict. He towed my car twice, once without warning. He watches my house. He spreads rumors. And now he's created an atmosphere of fear." She paused for effect. "I've lived here nearly 2 decades. I've served on the board, organized cleanup days, helped new families settle in. And now, because I asked him to be respectful of shared spaces, I'm being punished." A few people nodded. One woman even sighed sympathetically. Then it was Darnell's turn. He stood slowly, hands loose at his sides. No notes in hand, he'd memorized the key points. "I moved here because I wanted a quiet place to build a life," he began. "I work from home most days. I keep to myself. But from the start, my driveway was blocked, repeatedly by Ms. Whitmore's vehicle." He walked to the front and placed a folder on the table. "I left polite notes. I spoke at a meeting. When that didn't work, I followed city law. Both times my driveway was fully blocked. The police confirmed it. The towing company confirmed it." He turned to the room. "I didn't tow her car to be cruel. I did it because I couldn't leave my own home. And after the second time, someone vandalized my garage. That's not a coincidence." Then Mrs. Ellison stood. She was in her 70s, soft-spoken but firm. "I've lived here 12 years, she said. I've seen how things work. Linda doesn't just enforce rules, she picks who they apply to. Newcomers, especially those who don't fit the usual look, get extra scrutiny. The Chens, the Rodriguez family, now Darnell, it's a pattern, the young couple spoke next. We stayed quiet because we didn't want trouble, the husband said. But watching this happen, it made us realize silence helps the wrong person. Linda's face tightened. She whispered something to the board member beside her. When it was her turn to respond, she said, "This is all hearsay. I've never treated anyone unfairly. If people feel targeted, maybe they should examine their own behavior." But the tide had shifted. One board member, a quiet man who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, you filed this complaint after your car was towed for blocking a driveway. That's not harassment. That's consequence," another added. "And the vandalism, that's serious. We can't ignore that." After an hour of discussion, the chair announced their decision. The board finds no evidence of hostile intent by the resident of Unit 24B. His actions were in line with city ordinance. The complaint is dismissed. A soft murmur went through the room. Then the chair turned to Linda. "However, given the repeated driveway incidents and the impact on community harmony, the board issues a formal written warning to you, Ms. Whitmore, regarding parking violations and conduct toward fellow residents." Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She stood abruptly, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. Darnell exhaled. It wasn't a grand victory. No cheers, no applause, but it was justice. Quiet paper and ink justice. Outside, the air felt lighter. Chloe squeezed his arm. "You did it." "I didn't do it alone," he said. That night he grilled burgers on his patio. Just him and Chloe. No big celebration, just the smell of charcoal and the sound of crickets. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe, but peace, he was learning, never lasts long when someone's pride is wounded. 2 days later, he found a folded piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. No name, no signature, just 3 lines in neat handwriting. "You won. Now leave us alone. This neighborhood was fine before you came." He stared at it for a long time. Not angry, just sad, because the truth was the neighborhood hadn't been fine. It had just been quiet for some. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Thanks for standing up. We've all been scared too." He didn't reply right away. Just looked out at his driveway, empty, open, his car parked neatly inside. He typed back, "You're not alone." Then he went inside, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat on the couch. The ficus in the corner was starting to sprout new leaves, small, green, stubborn like him. He knew Linda wouldn't come after him the same way again, but he also knew people like her didn't disappear. They just changed tactics. Maybe it'd be noise complaints next, or suspicious activity reports when he had friends over, or whispering to future buyers that Unit 24B was trouble. But none of that mattered if the people around him started speaking up too. The next morning, he walked to the mailbox and saw Mrs. Ellison watering her roses. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. No words needed. He'd proven he belonged, not by shouting, but by staying. By showing up. By refusing to be shamed out of his own life. And that, he realized, was the real win, not the hearing. Not the warning. But the quiet shift in the air, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this neighborhood could become something better. For everyone. The weeks after the hearing settled like dust after a storm, quiet at first, then slowly rearranging into something new. Darnell noticed it in small ways. The woman with the poodle started waving again. The mail carrier lingered to ask how his garden was doing. Even the HOA newsletter included a bland but clear reminder. All residents must comply with city parking laws. Blocking driveways is a violation. Linda, meanwhile, became a ghost. She kept her blinds drawn. She parked in her assigned spot without fail. She didn't attend the next HOA meeting. When their paths nearly crossed at the recycling bins, she turned and walked the other way. Darnell didn't gloat. He just kept living, watering his herbs, working from his sunlit desk, taking evening walks around the loop. He'd installed a small security camera above his garage, discreet and angled only at his driveway, not out of fear but peace of mind. Then came the cookout. It started as a thought over coffee one Sunday morning. What if I threw a little get-together? Just burgers, music, nothing fancy. He ran it by Chloe on the phone. "Do it," she said, not as a victory party, just as, hello. So he sent simple texts to the neighbors who'd spoken up, the couple with the toddler, Mrs. Ellison, even the quiet man from the board. No pressure. Just, "Grilling Saturday at 4. Come if you'd like." To his surprise, nearly everyone said yes. He borrowed folding chairs, strung up fairy lights, and made a playlist of old soul tracks his dad used to play. He grilled veggie burgers and chicken, set out lemonade in a big glass pitcher, and put out a bowl of water for dogs. By 4:15, the patio was full. Kids ran barefoot on the grass. Someone brought homemade cornbread. Mrs. Ellison sat in the shade, laughing at a story the young dad told about his son's first bike crash. Even the retired postal worker from the end of the row showed up, holding a six-pack and saying, "Heard you finally put that parking nonsense to bed." Darnell didn't mention Linda once. This wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming normalcy. But as the sun dipped low and the fireflies blinked on, he caught a glimpse of movement across the street. Linda stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching. Not angry, not crying, just there, like she was trying to understand how he'd turned isolation into connection without her permission. He didn't wave, didn't stare, just turned back to the grill and flipped a burger. Later, as people packed up, the young mom handed him a container of leftover cornbread. "We should do this monthly," she said. "Rotating houses. Build something real," he nodded. "I'd like that." That night, lying in bed, Darnell felt something he hadn't in months. Ease. Not because the problem was gone, people like Linda didn't vanish overnight, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Still, he stayed careful. He kept his logs updated. He saved every HOA email. He even attended the next board meeting, not to speak but to listen, and what he heard surprised him. The board was discussing policy updates. One member proposed aligning all HOA rules with city and county codes. No more made-up restrictions that contradicted actual law. Another suggested adding a clause about respectful conduct and protection from targeted harassment. It was dry, bureaucratic stuff, but underneath it was healing. When the chair opened the floor for resident input, Darnell raised his hand, not to complain but to thank them. "I appreciate the changes," he said. "It makes this feel like a place where everyone can belong." A few people nodded. Even the board members who'd once stayed silent met his eyes. After the meeting, the quiet man from the board stopped him in the parking lot. "You handled yourself with dignity," he said. "That matters more than people realize," Darnell just said. "I just wanted to live in peace." "You earned it," the man replied, then walked off. Back home, Darnell checked his security footage out of habit. Nothing unusual, just his car, his driveway, the streetlights flickering on at dusk. He thought about the spray-painted symbol that used to be there. Gone now, but not forgotten. He'd learned something through all this. Belonging isn't given. It's claimed. Quietly, firmly, every single day. A few days later, he got an email from the HOA. The revised rules had passed. Among them, a clear statement that no resident may be subjected to repeated targeted complaints without evidence, and that all towing decisions must follow municipal law, not personal opinion. It wasn't a headline. It wouldn't go viral, but it was real change. He printed the policy update and pinned it to his bulletin board next to his lease and his electric bill. A quiet reminder that systems can shift, even slow, stubborn ones, when someone refuses to accept the way things are. One evening, as he watered his patio plants, Mrs. Ellison walked over with a small pot in her hands. "Mint," she said, handing it to him. "Grows like crazy. Thought you could use some." He took it, smiling. "Thanks." She paused, then added, "You know, when I moved here, I was the new one, too. People whispered about my accent, my garden, even my curtains. Took me years to feel like I belonged." Darnell looked at her, really looked. "How'd you do it?" She shrugged. "Stayed. Planted flowers. Said hello. Waited for the right people to notice." He nodded. "That was it, wasn't it? Not winning a battle. Just staying long enough for kindness to catch up." The next weekend, he saw Linda loading groceries into her car. She didn't look at him, but she didn't hurry away either. For the first time, she seemed smaller, not less powerful exactly, but less certain, like the ground beneath her had shifted and she was still finding her balance. He didn't feel sorry for her. But he didn't hate her either. He just saw her, flawed, human, stuck in a version of the world that was slipping away, and he realized he didn't need her approval to belong here. His home wasn't defined by her glare, or her parking spot, or her rumors. It was defined by the smell of rain on his patio, the sound of kids laughing down the street, the way his ficus reached for the light. He'd fought not to change her, but to protect his right to exist without apology. And in the end, that was enough. One morning, he backed out of his driveway without hesitation. No squeezing, no checking mirrors twice, no holding his breath. Just smooth, easy motion into the open street. He drove to work with the windows down, music low, sun warm on his arms. This was his life now, not perfect, not drama-free, but his, and no one, not even the loudest voice on the block, could take that away. Summer deepened, and with it, something in the neighborhood softened. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow thaw after a long winter. Darnell noticed it in the way people lingered after picking up their mail, in the shared complaints about the heat wave, in the way someone left a basket of zucchini on his doorstep with a note that just said, "Too many in my garden." He'd started walking every evening after dinner, just around the loop, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mrs. Ellison, who liked to point out which birds were nesting where. Other times he'd fall into step with the young dad from down the row, both of them pushing strollers or letting their dogs sniff the same fire hydrant. Linda still lived 3 units down. She kept to herself, and he respected that. No more parking games, no more notes, no more glares. It wasn't friendship, maybe it never would be, but it was peace. And after everything, that felt like a gift. The HOA had changed too. The new conduct policy was more than words on paper. At the last meeting, they'd actually voted down a complaint from a resident who claimed a neighbor's wind chimes were too ethnic. The board chair had said, simply, as long as it's not violating noise ordinances, personal taste isn't grounds for action. People had actually clapped. Darnell didn't speak much at meetings anymore. He didn't need to. He showed up, listened, and sometimes offered a quiet thank you when someone referenced the updated rules. He'd become part of the fabric, not as the new guy who caused trouble, but as just Darnell, the one with the herb garden, the one who fixed Mrs. Ellison's Wi-Fi, the one who always shoveled the sidewalk after snow, even the part in front of empty units. One Saturday morning, he got a text from the young mom. "We're thinking of starting a weekend cleanup crew. Pick up litter, plant flowers in the common areas. You in?" He replied instantly, "Count me in." The first cleanup day drew 8 people. They brought gloves, trash bags, and a few flats of marigolds. Even the retired postal worker showed up with a thermos of coffee and a rake he'd had since the 90s. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then someone started humming an old Motown tune. And soon they were all laughing about who could name the most songs from memory. Linda watched from her window. Darnell saw her curtain move, but she didn't come out. And that was okay. Later, as they stood back to admire their work, fresh mulch around the signpost, wildflowers blooming near the mailbox cluster, Mrs. Ellison turned to him. "You know," she said, "this place feels different now." "How so?" He asked. "Like it's ours," she said. "All of ours." He understood what she meant. It wasn't just about rules or parking or who belonged. It was about care. About showing up not just to protect your own space, but to tend to the shared one. That night, Darnell sat on his patio with a cold drink, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of a lawnmower. His phone buzzed, a photo from Chloe. It was a screenshot of a housing forum thread titled, "How to Handle HOA Bullying." Someone had posted his story without names, and dozens had replied with their own experiences, and thanks. He didn't reply. But he saved the screenshot. A few days later, he got an email from the city's neighborhood services office. They were updating their resident rights guide and wanted to include a real-life example of how documenting violations and knowing local laws could resolve conflicts. Would he be willing to share his experience, anonymous, of course? He thought about it for a day. Then he said yes, not for fame, not for revenge, but because maybe somewhere someone else was sitting in their driveway blocked in, wondering if they should speak up. And if his story gave them even a little courage, it was worth it. Fall came early that year. Leaves turned gold and red, crunching underfoot. Darnell raked his small patch of yard and bagged the leaves, then helped Mrs. Ellison with hers. She insisted on making him tea afterward, and they sat on her porch watching squirrels chase each other up an oak tree. "You ever think about moving?" she asked suddenly. He shook his head. "Not anymore. This is home," she smiled. "Good, because we'd miss you." He believed her. One afternoon he found a small envelope in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a gift card to the local hardware store and a note in neat cursive. "For your garden. You've made this place better." He didn't know who it was from. Maybe the couple with the toddler. Maybe the postal worker. Maybe someone he'd never even spoken to. It didn't matter. What mattered was the gesture, the quiet acknowledgement that change had happened and people noticed. He used the gift card to buy a bird feeder and hung it from the tree near his patio. Within a week, finches and sparrows visited daily. He'd sit with his morning coffee and watch them, feeling a kind of calm he hadn't known he was missing. Christmas came and went. He strung lights along his railing, played jazz softly through an outdoor speaker, and left out cookies for the mail carrier on Christmas Eve. On New Year's Day, he walked the loop again, this time in a light jacket, breathing in the crisp air. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, alive in its ordinary way. He thought about the day he'd moved in, nervous, hopeful, unsure if he'd fit. He thought about the silver SUV blocking his driveway, the spray-painted symbol, the tense silence of the HOA hearing. All of it felt like another lifetime, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning, because real belonging isn't given. It's built, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, act of courage by act of courage, and he'd built something worth staying for. One evening, as dusk settled and the streetlights flickered on, he stood in his driveway just for a moment. His car sat neatly inside, unblocked, unhurried. No notes, no warnings. No fear, just home. He took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain and earth and possibility. Some victories aren't loud. They don't come with trophies or headlines. They're the quiet moments, like opening your car door without hesitation, or sharing zucchini with a neighbor, or hearing a child laugh on a street that once felt cold. This was his victory. Not over anyone, but for himself. For peace, for the right to exist, fully and freely in the place he'd chosen. And as he walked inside, leaving the door open just a crack to let in the night air, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere.